Ferrari 296 GTB vs McLaren Artura. Main specs and performance figures.
Ferrari 296 GTB comes with a 3-liter V6 with 120 degrees between bunks, internally called Piccolo V12, coupled to an electric motor. The two bring 830 horsepower, 740 Nm of torque. The V6 alone reaches 663 horsepower at 8,000 RPM, while the electric motor 167 horsepower with a battery of 7.4 kWh. The 296 gets an 8-speed automatic dual clutch and reaches, according to Ferrari, over 205 miles per hour. Acceleration times: 0-62 is covered in 2.8 seconds and 124 is reached in just 7.3 seconds. The dry weight is of 1,470 kilos, which is about 35 kilos more than its predecessor, the F8 Tributo. Dimensions: it's 4.56 meter long, 1.96 meter wide and only 1.19 meter tall, which means 15 millimeters shorter, 20 millimeters tighter and about 10 millimeters lower than a Tributo. The steering has morphed from the electro-hydraulic assistance of the F8, an attribute retained for the McLaren Artura though, to electromechanical, which is generally regarded as being less feelsome. It gets rear-wheel drive traction and as a standard comes fitted with 20-inch front and rear alloy wheels. Artura comes with a mid-longitudinally mounted 3-liter V6 with 120 degrees between bunks with 585 horsepower at 7,500 RPM, coupled to a 96 horsepower electric motor with a battery of 7.4 kWh. Combined power 680 horsepower. It gets an 8-speed dual-clutch automatic gearbox. It reaches a top speed of 205 miles per hour, accelerates to 62 miles per hour in 2.9 seconds and to 124 miles per hour in 8.3 seconds. Dry weight of 1,395 kilos, which is more than the 1,283 of the 720S. Dimensions are 4.54 meter long, 1.91 meter wide and 1.19 meter tall, very close to the dimensions of the 296. It gets a rear-wheel drive with an electronically controlled differential that independently controls torque moving across the rear axle. Lighter and more controllable than a mechanical differential, the E-differential locks and unlocks individual rear wheels to improve the Artura's traction out of corners. As standard, the Artura comes with 19-inch front and 20-inch rear wheels.
The two hybridized V6 engine supercars are more powerful than their V8 predecessors and don't give up to the internal combustion engine driving pleasure. The engine of the 296 comes from a new idea: adopt a 6-cylinder architecture with a wide V 120 degrees, an uncommon solution today, but tested by Ferrari on the Formula 1 winner 156 in 1961. The wide V allowed the insertion of the two turbochargers inside the cylinder's bank and to optimize the fuel system in the lower areas of the engine. The result is a lower center of gravity engine, lighter -30 kilos than the V8 and more compact to house the hybrid section without the need of a longer wheelbase. That of the 296 GTB is indeed 2.6 meter, 50 millimeters less than the F8 Tributo.
This leads to a car that doesn't feel particularly turbocharged or electrified. While the F8's V8 is more impressive in the mid-ranger than the top end, the V6 of the 296 soars to 8,500 RPM, with the E-motor there to enhance the V6, not to take any leadership role. And the sound has a higher pitch and richer tone than that of the V8. Ferrari engineers nicknamed it indeed the Little V12. The Artura came as a replacement for the McLaren 570S, with the first ever created in-house engine, a twin-turbo V6. McLaren chose a 120V angle 2, which is just slightly narrower than a flat 6 and requires a balanced shaft. This is to keep the center of gravity low, and as a flat 6 had been considered too wide for the Artura's carbon fiber platform. Also here, the turbochargers are placed from the sides of the engine to inside the valley of the V, reducing the manifold length, hence decreasing the turbo lag. This architecture keeps the overall engine package short, as the Artura has an electric motor integrated within its dual-clutch gearbox. The E-motor works similarly to that of the McLaren P1, giving the Artura a broad torque curve and sharp throttle response. The peak power comes at 7,500 RPM, but the engine spins up to 8,500 to have high revving theatre. For the 296 GTB there is a starting price of $323,000 but if you want to load it up with options as for any Ferrari, you can add tens of thousands. The Assetto Firano package brings in extra aerodynamic appendages, a lighter engine cover made from polycarbonate rather than glass, carbon fiber door cards but also magneto-rheological fixed-rate dampers adopted in sports car racing, brings the price up to $360,000. Artura has instead the starting price of just $238,000. The following is based on the great reviews from James Dennison from Car and Chris Harris. I'll put the links in the description below. First difference between the two supercars is Ferrari's aluminium versus McLaren carbon fiber tube, although there is an aluminium subframe on the McLaren. The Ferrari 296 makes you reassess what the supercar and hypercar realms are, as this is the baby Ferrari, the new entry-level supercar with 830 horsepower through the rear wheels, enough for an hypercar to shine. For some things, it can feel even better than an SF90. No front axle motors, not missing a front boot, but just a nice rear-wheel drive hybrid powertrain. Sometimes it feels there's a delay in the gear change, but actually the electric motor kicks in and fills that gap. There is no loss in momentum, Chris says. The steering of the 296 could perhaps have more feel. The Artura feels much better. You can really feel what the front wheels are doing. Ferrari has an electric power-assisted steering, while the Artura has an electro-hydraulic system. Steering wheel is also full of buttons to a level that it takes a bit to get acquainted to it and do not get distracted. On the Artura, steering wheel is quite clean, with the carbon paddles behind as only ornament. You get two drive mode selectors, one for the powertrain and one for the chassis in both supercars, and the difference between race and sport mode in the McLaren is noticeable for the torque and the overall car feeling. However, the gearbox on the Artura is not as snappy as that of the 296. Several drivers are saying that the Artura could and should sound better to get the same level of the 296. On track, that matters, but only to a certain extent. What's interesting is Ferrari has regenerative braking while McLaren does not. This could perhaps seem the feeling would be better on the McLaren. On the contrary, the braking on the Ferrari is stronger, a testament of the great work on the prancing horses supercar. Both supercars show almost no inertia in the corners, even though these cars have a dry weight of over 1,400 kilos. The powertrain in the Ferrari is superior, yet in the Artura, very high speed can be reached on corners, knowing the rear end will stay planted. In the Artura, the feeling is to sit lower and feel more on the road. It feels narrower and a more malleable tool than the Ferrari. The McLaren lets you have more fun. So, what's the final verdict? Artura is a more accessible and less scary track weapons, while the 296 shines when getting to the limit for its higher abilities. The powertrain is magnificent and makes it a faster car. However, keep in mind the price gap that should make you reconsider the differences between the two, perhaps in favor to the McLaren. Money aside, though, there's only one clear winner. Prices. We said that roughly Ferrari 296 GTB starts at $323,000. Instead, Artura starts at $238,000. Let's have a look at the websites. So I'm using autotrader.com for US, Autotrader UK for UK, and then mobile.de for prices in euros. Autotrader.com, I couldn't find anything about the 296 GTB, so going to autotrader.co.uk, prices are at around 330,000. So considering that the current exchange, £1 is 1.2021 US dollars, we are talking about 380 roughly thousand US dollars. Instead, if we go for euros, we have different examples. By the way, the example in the UK, I really love this spec. Let me know what color you prefer the most, but this one looks really neat. So this is from Maranello Sales. Very good example, 295 miles, 330,000 pounds. Instead, mobile.de, we have a few examples at around 380, 399, 350. So these are roughly the prices, quite similar. Instead, we go for the Artura. So autotrader.com in the US, we have two examples, 260, 280 from suburban exotic motorcars from Michigan. Pretty new examples basically. And then mobile.de about 280,000 euros. So what's your pick here, Ferrari 296 GTB or McLaren Artura? Leave a comment below and have a look at this other comparison I've made.